The film opens in a correctional facility where our lead, Jake, is summoned by the warden. He offers him a chance to get out and convince his son, Jesus, the most sought-after basketball prospect, to play for the big states on the governor's behalf in exchange for a reduced sentence. Jake agrees and works on his plan to eat allergic food to get hospitalized. Once he's reached that state, he quarantines him and sends him away for a week. The warden cherry-picks 2 parole officers to chaperone Jake and make sure he doesn't slide away from his actual plan. Meanwhile, we see Jesus and his high school team playing basketball in the garden court. One of his teammates shows a newspaper cutout of the article about their recent win as the Lincoln Rail Splitters high school basketball team. Elsewhere, Jake's parole officers bring him to a raggedy apartment building. They remind him he's still a convicted felon and cannot enjoy his week as a free man. They hand him the intent letter, which Jake has to get signed by Jesus. They give him a week's worth of vanity money and set up his ankle monitor before leaving. The next day, Jesus runs to the bus stand and goes to school with his girlfriend, Lala. When they reach school, Lala asks him if he has narrowed down his future choices and persuades him to meet an agent, who's a family friend of her parents. He takes his frustration to his school coach, who thinks people care for him. Jesus has grown up with hardships, so he knows people are only there to get a piece of him and are bothering him by asking his future plans. The following day, Jake walks out of his apartment and witnesses his neighbors, a loud couple. The man gets offended by his gaze, so he immediately apologizes and walks out of there. He picks up his daughter Mary from school and walks her home. Jake catches up with her and finds out Jesus and Mary have moved out from their Uncle Bubba's house, and they are living by themselves. Mary brings Jake in their apartment on the condition that he will leave before Jesus arrives. Jake finds their hall packed with Jesus' trophies and achievements. As he catches up with Mary, Jesus returns home unannounced. He scolds Mary for letting in strangers. He hates Jake and doesn't want him around, so he agrees to meet in the garden. Once Jake leaves, Jesus takes Mary to Uncle Bubba and Aunt Sally's place. His cousin, Booger, takes Mary in his room so the elders can talk. Jesus tells them about Jake's sudden arrival from jail, who claims to be on a work release program. Bubba thinks Jake is after his money and he should meet up with him to find out his motives. Bubba loses his mind and starts reminding Jesus to pay up for the times he looked after him now that he's getting famous and buying apartments. Sally scolds Bubba for being so gluttonous and walks away. Bubba thinks Jake's getting deals already that are paying for him because he doesn't have a job yet. Jesus gets disappointed, but promises that he will pay up as soon as he gets money. On the other hand, Jake buys himself designer boots and heads to the garden to play basketball with his son. Jesus shows up with Booger. Jake brings in the mother discussion, so Jesus decides to leave. Jake goes after him and begs to talk to him. He asks him about his future goals too. Jesus gets frustrated to hear another question about his future, but Jake clarifies that he only wants Jesus to never compromise. Jesus gets mad at him and reminds him he has to compromise in order to look after Mary since no one else will. He also brings up how he has hated his name ever since he was a kid. He gets a flashback of his mother calling him back to the apartment while Booger and the kids bully him for his name. When Jesus brings up Jake killing his own wife, they end up on bad terms and part ways. That night, Jesus has a word with Mary before sleep, who's getting brainwashed by Bubba and all her friends about Jesus getting famous and buying them houses. When she says she won't need education because of Jesus' fame, he almost beats her and reminds her their mother wanted both her children to be educated. He then sleeps watching interviews of famous people praising how good he is in his game, and later, an interview of himself speaking of running his life by his mother's desire to prioritize education. On the other hand, Jake intervenes in the matters of the couple next door after hearing the man beat the woman. Once the man leaves, he goes into her room and helps her put a cold towel on her beaten-up face. He asks her why she stays with such a man, so she reveals her name is Dakota. and the man is her pimp, Sweetheart. When she asks about Jake, he reveals his true story. After midnight, Lala wakes up Jesus in his sleep through a phone call and reminds him to meet the agent, whose assistant she has a secret affair with. The next morning, the parole officers pay Jake a visit and remind him to speed up on the job. Jesus gets crowded by his fans near the bus stop, so Booger kicks them away. A thug named Big Time Willie offers them a ride in his fancy car, but they pass on the offer. When Jake shows up to talk to him, Jesus takes the ride with Booger and flees. On their way, Willie racially discriminates against him and tells him he can never make it as a big shot because black people always get involved with drugs and alcohol the second they get rich. They also get into trouble, such as murder and having AIDS. At last, he warns Jesus of the fake family and friends who will pretend to love him for his money. When Jesus gets to school, he has issues playing with his team due to the newly found differences. His coach brings him aside and bribes him with $10,000 in cash to tell him his plans so he can apply for his coach. Jesus doesn't take the bribe and becomes disheartened that his coach is also trying to make money off of him like others. He makes love with Lala in the amusement park rides at night and takes up on her offer to meet their agent, who can't stop showing off his wealth in order to get Jesus to land an agent contract with him. Jesus doesn't want to, so he tries giving him an expensive platinum watch as a gift. Jesus is mature enough to figure out there will be strings attached to it and walks out of there. While the agent still tries to sell his pitch, Jesus notes Lala getting a little too close with the assistant in the pool. He returns home and reads the last letter his mother wrote to him when he went away to a camp in his childhood. Among many things, she discusses that she thinks Jesus doesn't want to pursue basketball, and it's just Jake pushing him in that direction. This leads him to have a flashback of his father, who's being firm yet gentle with him during their practice, and later being a good father at the dinner table. He grows a soft spot for Jake and almost reads his years of piled letters from jail, but then doesn't. Scenes transition to Jake, who has the flashback of how he treated Jesus during practice. He secretly drinks that one night and keeps pushing Jesus a little too hard to make him perform well under pressure. Instead, Jesus loses his progress. He ends up throwing away the ball and returning home to have dinner with his mother and Booger. Jake shows up all drunk and starts being rude with Jesus. When he tries to walk away, Jake starts beating him up. The mother tries to push him away, but he pushes her instead. Her head bangs against the kitchen counters, and she dies. The next morning, the father and son meet again on the piers, where Jake lightens the tension between them by revealing he named him Jesus, after a successful NBA player, Earl Monroe, who was titled Jesus for his victories. However, Jesus becomes upset the second Jake brings up why he's actually here. He thinks Jake is just like the others, but Jake reminds him he's his father and will never be like the others. He also warns her about Lala and her plans. That day, Jesus visits a university where his friend, Chick, is constantly persuading him to come too after finishing high school. Chick brings him to the basketball court where he's arranged a rave slideshow of Jesus, edited as the religious son of God. He even introduces him to their coach Billy, who makes the boys pray that Jesus comes to them. Later, he eats with him and leaves him to some girls to have fun. On the other hand, Jake meets Lala outside her school and asks for Jake's whereabouts. When he sees the assistant coming to pick her up, he figures out she's with the agents making money by luring in Jesus with love. He asks her to work for him instead and lure Jesus to him. But when she doesn't, the assistant comes to back him off. Jake hits him and runs. He finds Booger on his way, who also claims to know nothing about Jesus. Now, Jake visits his parole officers and begs them for more money to date a girl. But they humiliate him before giving him the cash. He ends up spending all of it on one night of making love with Dakota. The next day, Jesus gets picked up by Bubba, who's purchased a stolen car on lower rates for him, but Jesus doesn't accept it. Jake visits his wife's grave with flowers and begs for forgiveness. Later that night, Jesus finds out Lala has been making money off of luring him to the agents, so they have a huge argument and end their relationship. Jake meets Jesus on the last day and leaves his luck on a game with his son. If Jake wins 11 scores, he wants the intent papers signed, and if Jesus wins, he will go back to the correctional facility forever. Jesus agrees and lets him dunk for the first 5 times. After that, he scores 11 dunks with a streak. Jake still asks him to sign the papers, but he throws them on the ground. The parole officers also show up to arrest him, so Jake gives the last advice and asks to get rid of his anger, or else he'll turn out like his father. This hits Jesus hard. When the time to choose arrives, Jesus does eventually announce opting for big states, which disappoints all the people that were after him. Jake is summoned by the warden, who clarifies that his punishment won't be reduced since he wasn't the one to convince Jesus to sign for the big states. Jake accepts this and sends Jesus a letter, which he finally reads and stops hating Jake, for he was only pushing him hard to bring out the best in him, which has indeed worked out. Jesus plays alone on his new college court, whereas Jake plays in the facility. When he throws his ball out of the prison walls, a rusty ball lands in Jesus' court, which reminds him of his father. Here, the movie ends. I am sure you liked the story recap. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps like that.